Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. We're happy today to have a very special guest, Rick Underwood, a longtime friend of all of us here at Faithful and True. And Rick is joining us via phone, and we've been looking forward to having our chat with Rick. Rick, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much.
Well, Rick, as we had started to talk about earlier, we've been looking forward to having you as a guest on the show because of your extensive research that you have done, and a lot of it has been based around our Men of Valor workshops here at Faithful and True. I'm going to hand you over to Dr. Greg Miller, the host of the show, to continue the conversation.
So yeah, Rick, it is great to have you. And as Randy said, you've been a friend of Faithful and True. And the way I got to know you in a deeper way is several years ago, Rick spent time here as a part of the team doing research with participants that had been to our workshop. And so we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I first want to hear, how did you first hear about Faithful and True and meet Mark Laser?
Oh man, it's a pleasure to speak anytime about my opportunity to meet with Dr. Laser. And I recently, went back through my notes to find that answer myself about when did I first meet Dr. Laser, and that was early on when I was in my master's classes. When I was getting my master's in counseling, I participated in a workshop as an intern. And Dr. Laser was a guest speaker in a workshop in Nashville, and he spoke to me. It felt like, of course, I was not even a participant in the workshop. I was there as an intern working, but he spoke about shame. His topic that night was shame, and I recognized and realized that what he was speaking about was something that I had dealt with most of my life. Mm-hmm. And so his first introduction to me was a workshop where I was just listening and heard him. And immediately when I got into my master's degree and started counseling on my own, recognized that the issue of compulsive sex addiction is a crucial topic that was really not addressed very well within the church, if I might say. Mm-hmm. And I've been a part of the church. I'm an ordained elder as well as a doctor, and recognize that the subject of compulsive behavior within the church in general was not well addressed. And so that's what kind of introduced me to Dr. Laser, and we became friends. And when I had the opportunity to do my dissertation, it was pretty confident of what I wanted to do it on. And that was the Men of Valor workshop.
Well, and like you identified, the thing that drew you in was that lecture on shame, and maybe at some point even identifying some shame in your own life, but also recognizing the significant role that shame plays in the role in the lives of men who are struggling with sexual addiction, because shame is one of the things that we spend time talking about at the Men of Valor workshop. What was it that caused you to want to just focus specifically on doing some research around the men that come to the workshop and their experience while they are here in Minnesota?
Well, with my research and when I was applying, looking at my own practice, recognized that the understanding of the treatment of compulsive sex addiction that was presented by Dr. Laser, with the unapologetic aspect of faith in the treatment plan was my language. Mm-hmm. It was what I knew that needed to be included, and so I had there's a staff person a great friend of mine that was dealing with an issue that needed immediate treatment. And Dr. Laser, he didn't know me very well at that time, but he took my call. And he took my call, and I explained to him a friend that I needed to get into a workshop, and he was able to get that friend into the workshop, and I was just trusting and knowing that it was going to be exactly what he needed, and it was. And so, when it came time for my research, it was the first research question that I presented to my dissertation class, and I won't take a lot of time, but let me just say that I was discouraged from my academic counterparts to take on this workshop, to take on this study, because of the riskiness of traveling from Nashville to Minnesota all those months, and the expense, and quite frankly, maybe the lack of participation that the men would participate.
Right.
And I am so glad that it turned out the way that I anticipated that it would. We had nearly 100% participation of the men that participated, which is still amazing to my dissertation committee, of the number of men that participated, and I knew that to be a result of what happens at the workshop.
Well, and I think another piece of that is, we do see this, where men who come to the workshop, when we cast the vision that, filling out the survey before and after was going to be helpful and clarifying for the men that would come behind them, they absolutely wanted to be a part of this experience. And, as the director of the men's workshop, when men have questions about it, a lot of times they're directed to me. And one of the questions that we get is, what difference can 3 days make? And your research directly addresses that issue of helping people to understand what happens for them by participating and being at the workshop for 3 days. So just talk a little bit about what was your process, the pre-test, the post-test, kind of what were the ways that you gathered your data?
Well, it was, we had the opportunity, Dr. Laser gave us the opportunity to present the assessments immediately before the workshop began, which was really important to the formality of the workshop, was that that we did a pre-test, post-test type of workshop, type of measurements, and we presented the assessments immediately before the workshop, before any conversation from Dr. Laser or from any of the speakers. And then we did a post-test at the end of the workshop, at the end of the 3 days. Mm-hmm. So it was a clear pre-test, post-test. The assessments were to address the stages of shame, the hopelessness, and the readiness to change. Those were the three main questions of the research.
Yeah, and that idea of change, I think, is a theme that is very important. And in fact, we've been spending our last several podcasts, and we'll in the future talking about this idea of change and figuring out, we all believe in some sort of hope of transformation, that we can have this new life. And through your research, we began to see how the men began to experience change even while they were here. So just tell us a little bit about each of those things, the increase in hope, the reduction of shame, and even that idea of openness to change based on what you discovered through your research.
Sure. We addressed the issue of shame, by the shame inventory, which is a self-report designed to test the individual's propensity to experience both global shame and individual shame. The assessment was modeled, was modeled for general shame. So we addressed general shame, and then we modified the with permission of the author, for sexual shame. And so both of those had a significant decrease in shame for those that participated, both in the global shame and sexual shame.
Right, and Rick, I think that's part of the significance of what you discovered is by measuring both global shame, and global shame would be the shame that we all experience in our lives to whatever extent we do. But then you are also able, because of the population of men that come to our workshops, examine specific shame around their sexual acting out or their behaviors, or even the way that they perceive themselves as sexual men. And you could begin to see the impact of their behavior and their choices on the way that they perceive themselves sexually.
Absolutely. And we addressed, recognizing the general shame and as you said, global shame and then the sexual shame, because we all know that in the issue, working in this field, that shame is I call it the fuel that keeps the cycle of addiction going.
Mm-hmm.
And so we must reduce shame for the process of health.
Right.
And so we knew that was going to be important, and that surely, proved out to be. One of the significant findings that came out of that was that the difference, we also measured the level of sexual compulsive behavior by, the hypersexual behavior inventory 19, which was, created to really measure the specifics of compulsive sexual behavior. And it was one of the interesting findings was that the difference in the improvement in shame and hopelessness and readiness for change were not significantly different on the level or the degree of compulsive sexual behavior. So in other words, that the levels of sexual behavior across the board were significant to the individual, but the readiness for change and reduction of shame and increased hopelessness was not necessarily dictated by the level of the degree of compulsive behavior. I know that, in my work, and I assume sure there at Men of Valor, that so many men, when I recommend them to attend the Men of Valor in my individual practice, they will quickly, say, well, my issues are not this or they're not that.
Right.
They are, they're pornography, but they're not this or that, and so they kind of marginalize their acting out. And this research supports that it's not a level of intensity of the compulsive behavior that dictates or indicates the level of change.
Right. Well, and what you're identifying, I think, is so true. Where so many men hear about the Faithful and True workshop, the Men of Valor workshop, they hear about sexual addiction, and there are those that kind of minimize their behavior or minimize their experience, and kind of the thinking is, I'm not bad enough to need to go there. And some other men may go to the other extreme and believe they're too bad to come here, that, they're so far off the charts that these 3 days are not going to make a difference. So it is significant to be able to identify that it's not about your behavior. It's not about what you do that determines the addiction, but it's why you do what you do. And so it's not about catastrophizing my behavior or minimizing my behavior. So it is exciting to know that wherever a man is on the continuum of acting out, that wherever he is, he still has the opportunity to experience that invitation to change, as well as a reduction in the shame and also an increase in hope. And one thing, I don't know if your research saw this, but my perspective is that a man's shame many times is not even connected to the level of his acting out. Any acting out is enough to trigger that deeper level of shame.
Yes, I believe the research would support that statement easily. That because we know that shame, is any level of acting out creates a level of shame, and for most people, it is been a lifelong experience of shame.
Mm-hmm.
And so the ability to understand what shame is, the significant difference that is addressed and the difference between guilt and shame.
Mm-hmm.
And, which goes right along with the core beliefs of a person with sexual addiction that, that I am a bad person.
Right.
Not that I have done something bad. That whole, discussion of the difference between shame and guilt.
Right.
But when we can address shame for what shame is, and then we can begin the action of change.
Well, and you can also, you alluded to this earlier, we're in Carn's cycle of addiction, that the first place is woundedness, and then out of the woundedness comes the shame. So that lie that I believe that I'm a bad and worthless person, and like you said, shame is about my identity, is so central to the addiction because the acting out behavior, the fantasy, the rituals, all of that comes out of that place of shame. And so if we don't find ways to heal the wounds that created the shame, the men will stay stuck in their addiction. And so it wasn't just a message, boy, that's good to know, but it also validates the effectiveness of the workshop in helping men, even in those 3 days, begin to reduce their shame, which then brings us to something else that you begin to discover is even in those 3 days, men began to experience a greater sense of hope.
Right.
And
yes.
tell us about hope and how you even explored it.
Yes, well, we used a measurement called the Brief Hopelessness Inventory by Reed, and it's a hopelessness assessment that addresses the issues of indicates of depression, loneliness, suicidal ideation, and those kind of deeper understandings of hopelessness. And so it's a strong assessment that's been used, identified to be used with a lot of people where the differences of depression and hopelessness, or that'd be another podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a significant difference between depression and hopelessness.
Right.
And so we addressed hopelessness, with the Brief Hopelessness Inventory, and there was a significant increase in hope.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a significant change that leads us to the stages of change.
Right. Well, and one of the things about hopelessness is I was introduced to this idea in seminary that hopelessness isn't when there's no hope. Hopelessness is when you can't remember what hope is. And despair in the same way isn't when things are bad, it's when you can't imagine they will ever get better. And so one of the things that we try to do at the workshop is cast this vision and validate, yes, it is difficult and painful now, and there is a possibility that it won't always be like this. And we do want to kind of cast that vision that things can change, that things can improve.
Exactly. And I think, the workshop certainly provides that through so many means.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that we know that reduction of shame and the increase of hope, and then the stages of change. When I did this research, that was the research up until that time about compulsive sexual behavior. Very few, in fact, only one other study that could be found addressed the stages of change before my dissertation in 2014. And so, including the stages of change was from a formal assessment. It's a classic, the University of Rhode Island Change Assessment, that is a 24-item instrument that kind of, it addresses the subscales of pre-contemplation, contemplation, action, and maintenance.
Mm.
Those are the stages of change. And each participant moved significantly. Most of them moved 2 steps,
Wow.
if at least one, but most moved 2 steps into the stages of change, which I think is a testament to the results of the work of the first 2 questions of, we can see change,
Right.
we can see hope, And when they're introduced to understanding that shame can be reduced and that we can find hope, then it really propels them into the stages of change.
Well, and I absolutely agree this idea that all three of these are intertwined, because if I'm in my shame, the way that we teach it is my shame is based upon a lie I believe about myself and believe about God. And what we know is lies hold us hostage. Truth sets us free. So if I'm consumed in my shame, I'm in bondage to the lie. I don't have much hope, and I don't even believe that change is possible. And, you know, in addressing the issue of addiction, there are two questions that we need to ask. One is, do I want things to be better? And that's about desire. And the second is, do I believe things can be better? And that's about hope. And so if I can reduce my shame and start living more in the truth of who I am and who God is, then I'm going to have more hope because I'm not held hostage by the lies of shame. And then I'm going to be more willing and open to engage some sort of change.
I believe that that is lived out in the workshop and my experience there. And also I think that the data supports that objective completely.
You know, one thing that we haven't talked about, so there are different pieces to the workshop. One of them is teaching that we do. One of them is providing opportunity for men to engage their own story. And yet another piece of it that is significant is the piece of community. And what I see is that being with other men who are on the same journey, and those of us who lead just being a little bit further ahead of the journey, there is a hope that comes in being in a community of men desiring to become the men that God created them to be. But what we also teach, that it's only in the context of community that we can, the language I would use is shed our shame. That when I'm able to live in my truth and speak my truth in safe community, then I can shed my shame. So it's not something that occurs in isolation. In fact, it's being together in the workshop with other men. That's where we begin to experience more hope, reduce our shame, and then be open to change.
Right. I totally agree. And I think that is also supported by, I mean, we've experienced that. We see that in the workshop. We feel that sense of community in the workshop. And I believe that supports the other research that, being able to address the core beliefs that Carnes presents to us, about I'm isolated. This is my own. I'm the only one with this problem. If anybody knew me, they would reject me. That false belief. And so the community addresses each one of those sense of false beliefs immediately and lived out in the workshop.
You know what's interesting is, so we're recording this in the fall of 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. And so therefore the workshops have been online and been done virtually. And I can say the piece that I was most concerned about was, what does the virtual workshop do to community? And because, like I've identified, it's such a significant part of the experience. And what I would say is, doing the workshop virtually does in some way create the format of the community, but it doesn't limit the community. That we have done some things intentionally so that community can still occur, because we want the men to know that they are not alone. And we all need for other safe men to hear our stories so that we can experience the blessing that we are not alone and that what we have done is not too much.
Yes, that was one of my concerns for the workshop, with the pandemic early on, because I refer my individual clients there without hesitation, and when I knew that the pandemic was going to probably create for us, for you to have to be virtual, that was one of my concerns when I recommended my individual clients to attend. And I was so pleasantly surprised and encouraged when they attended the virtual workshop that they had the very same comments or very same connectedness that my other clients experienced when they attended the workshop in person.
Wow,
that's great to hear, Rick.
And I mean, I recommend my individual clients to the workshop often, and I have recommended so many in the past for the in person, and knowing the sense of community, Greg, like you and I know, that was when my current clients came, from attending virtually, they would speak about the very same things of community that my in-person clients experience.
Well, that is great. Well, Rick.
And also, it's like I've included those into my own groups, of course, for after the workshop. And so I have men in my groups that have attended both the in-person and the virtual, and they speak as if they attended the same workshop.
Well, great. Well, Rick, it has been great having you with us, and thanks for taking time. And Rick is a licensed counselor in Middle Tennessee and provides a variety of care and resources to the people there. As we've identified, he is a friend of Faithful and True, and we are so, and I remember those months well, your commitment to being at the workshop for those months so that you could do your research, and we are so grateful for your willingness to take time and share that with us.
Thank you. I just believe in it, and my experience, my life is different with my opportunity to be in relationship with Dr. Laser and Deb and Greg and you and the team. So it was a pleasure for me to have this time today.
Thank you so much, Rick, and we hope that you continue to be safe and in the best of health.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you for joining us today on the Faithful and True podcast with our special guest, Rick Underwood. We hope that today's message has been one for you. If you've been contemplating whether the Faithful and True Men of Valor workshop would be right for you, we hope that today's show was compelling evidence that it is a powerful experience, a transformative experience, and one that can really help you along your healing journey. Until we join you again next week, we hope that the coming week is going to be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and great vision.